It's okay not to be okay, but I promise I'm trying, by rayrae118, Chapter 18. Sirius looked up as the fireplace flared, and took a deep breath, steeling himself. He smiled and stepped forward, greeting his visitors. He was very glad that Minerva had offered him her home to live in, even though she was not in residence for the majority of the year. He was glad she trusted him enough, or thought he had grown up enough, not to burn it to the ground. Another visit to Grimmauld Place and a rather trying conversation with his family's house-elf creature had been executed shortly after he had seen Harry off to school. He had had to get firm with the elf, but a direct order to begin cleaning up his ancestral home had yielded results. Seemingly, Creature had been getting a little bored. He didn't think he would ever actually want to live there, but it would be nice to have the option, without having to be wary of anything he touched. Andromeda Tonks stepped out first, followed quickly by her husband Ted and their daughter Nymphadora. Andromeda steadied herself and looked for her cousin, smiling. It had been a long time since she had seen him. As the two disgraced members of the Black family, they had clung to each other. When she had run away from her family to marry Ted, a Muggle-born, she had been cast out from the family. Sirius had received the same treatment after he had run away to the Potters when he was at 16. And after Wahlburger's brother Alphard had left his nephew a sizable inheritance, Andromeda had made sure to invite him over for supper at least once a week, and they had happily hosted his friends as well, many times. "Sirius, it is so good to see you!" She stepped forward and embraced her favourite cousin. Sirius grinned back as the two separated. He shook Ted's hands and gave Nymphadora a light hug as well. "Thanks for coming," he replied, gesturing for the family to take a seat. Andromeda led the conversation, asking Sirius about his recovery, and generally catching up with everything he had missed. Tibby popped in a while later, announcing that dinner was ready, and the four witches and wizards made their way to the dining room. Remus joined them there, knowing that Sirius had wanted some time alone with his family first. "Hey, Moony!" Sirius grinned as the werewolf entered the room. Remus smiled and moved over to shake hands with Andromeda and Ted. "Andromeda, right? I remember you from a long time ago." Andromeda nodded, her face lighting up. "Little Remus Lupin! You've certainly grown up." Remus blushed and turned to her husband. "Ted, how are you?" Ted shook the younger man's hand firmly. "I am doing well, Remus. It's been a while, hasn't it?" Remus and Sirius both nodded. Nymphadora tripped forwards, offering her own hand as she blushed. "Hi, I'm Tonks." Remus smiled as he shook her hand. "I remember you, though it was a long time ago. You've certainly grown." Tonks's blush deepened. She didn't really remember meeting him, but she figured it must have been when Sirius was in school, and she had been quite young then. The group sat down to eat, and the meal passed in a whirlwind of laughter and stories about the past. Tonks kept sneaking glances at Remus, blushing every time he had asked her a question about her work, or what she did with her free time. All in all, Sirius thought it was a great night, and when the Tonkses left, they promised to spend some more time together, with the only family they had that they weren't ashamed of. The first meeting of the Interhouse Study Group took place the following Thursday, starting at 6:30 in the evening, which gave everyone enough time to eat supper first. It would last half an hour and a half, giving everyone plenty of time to make it back to the common rooms before curfew. The meeting of the leaders took place over the weekend before, and included Minerva and Flitwick as they hammered out the last-minute plans. As told, it would be a rather large group, consisting of Harry, Hermione, Ron, Ginny, and Neville from Gryffindor, Susan and Cedric from Hufflepuff, Cho and Luna from Ravenclaw, and Blaise and Daphne from Slytherin. The Slytherins were wary of the group, but they soon relaxed slightly when they realised that no one was judging them, and they were actually trying to involve them. Ron had been a bit of a challenge, but Harry had given him a very stern warning not to start anything, and to actually get to know them personally before he judged them based on a 1,000-year-old feud that probably had nothing to do with what they thought about now. It was Daphne who suggested they need a better name than Interhouse Study Group, but no one could come up with anything good. Finally, Blaise suggested the Defence Association. "I know we're not strictly talking about defence," he reasoned, "but it sounds good, and we're going to be helping them be able to better defend themselves." Everyone stared at him and he looked down. "We could call it the DA for short," he mumbled. Harry grinned. I like it, he declared, and just like that, the DA was born. The meeting was a great success. Minerva and Flitwick stayed in the background, ready to help if needed, but letting the students take control. Harry had started out rather nervously, but he soon gained momentum. He was pleased with how many students came. They were beginning with the first and second years and hoping they might gain some older students with time, but the younger years were the ones who were most likely to need the assistance. All in all, the majority of first years had come, and about half of the second years. He introduced the leaders from each house and asked them to form 12 groups. He told them it would make sure that at least one student from each house, if possible, and if not, there would be at least 3 houses represented in each group, and then waited as they formed up around the small round tables that had been placed in the room. Each leader then took one group, and they spent the next 15 minutes just getting the students to introduce themselves and getting to know each other a bit. Harry had decided they would take some time each meeting doing this, having the students from different groups each week, until everyone was familiar with their classmates. This wasn't just a study group. He really wanted these kids to get to know their peers. It was about forming friendships and bonds that would last longer than the 7 years they spent in school. After 15 minutes, the leader for each group would ask what they wanted to go over that night, and they would spend the rest of the time looking over school assignments and asking questions. At 8 o'clock, Harry sent them all back to their dorms and watched, smiling, as he saw groups of Hufflepuffs and Slytherins headed out towards the dungeons and kitchens, and Ravenclaws and Gryffindors headed up to the towers, talking about what they had learnt. More than one waved at their tutors and fellow classmates as they left, smiling happily. Ginny walked up to Harry and gave him a hug. As she pulled back, she kissed him on the cheek. "Nice going, Potter," she smiled. Harry grinned back, looking at the rest of his friends. "What did you guys think?" he asked as Ginny stepped to one side, her arm still wrapped around him, and his snaked around her waist. Cedric smiled his approval. "I think it went really well," he said, taking his girlfriend in his arms. Cho nodded. She'd been a little sceptical at first, but Cedric had talked her into it, and after listening to what Harry had planned out with his friends, she had to admit it was a really good idea. "I thought so as well," she agreed. "I think some friendships were born tonight." They're realising that without the walls of the different houses, they really have similar personalities and interests. Luna chimed in dreamily. "I suspect the fuzzwumps have something to do with it." They all respectfully ignored her final statement, but agreed with the first. Minerva and Flitwick then spent another 15 minutes going over the high and low points of the sessions, and discussing what they would change for the next week. They ended by telling the students how pleased they were with all their hard work. The Gryffindors, with Cho and Luna, headed up to the towers, while Cedric, Susan, Blaise and Daphne headed downstairs, all saying goodnight to each other before they parted for their separate common rooms. It wasn't only the younger students who were forming bonds of friendship that eclipsed the house separations. Harry had another dream that night, but once more he woke up wondering how the dream could be fuzzy around the edges. He definitely saw Wormtail, and some ugly-looking thing that spoke with Voldemort's voice. Again, he mentioned something about a competition, and he heard his name. Harry was getting confused and wondered if he should tell someone that he was dreaming about. He vowed to talk with Ginny, since she was definitely smarter than him. He wondered if he should tell Aunt Minerva, but he really didn't know what to say. "I'm having dreams that I think might be real, but please don't ask me how." Probably wouldn't go down that well. He wasn't a seer after all, so how could he prove this wasn't just some figment of his imagination? Ginny, of course, told him to speak with Minerva or write to Sirius, but Harry managed to put it off for the next few weeks. On December the 30th, the students of Hogwarts found themselves standing outside, waiting for the envoys from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang to arrive. Harry was starting to fidget from the cold when a shout drew all their eyes. A Hufflepuff third year was pointing to the sky. "Is it a dragon?" someone called out. "No, it's a house," was another guess. As the object drew closer, Harry realised it was actually a carriage, being carried by several gigantic horses. The carriage sat down and came to a stop, and the largest woman he had ever seen stepped out. "Madame Maxime, welcome." Dumbledore stepped forward and offered his hand, grasping hers, giving it a kiss. "Dumbledore," the giantess rumbled, "it is wonderful to see you again." The carriage doors opened and a number of students stepped out and stood there, shivering in their silk blue robes. Dumbledore smiled and spread his arms. "Welcome, students of Beauxbatons. I hope you find your stay to be relaxing and enjoyable. Would you care to wait for us for the Durmstrang contingent, or would you prefer to warm up inside?" Madame Maxime surveyed her students. "I think we should prefer to wait inside, Dumbledore. It is much colder this far north than what we are used to." The French students made their way inside, with one student in particular drawing a number of eyes. Her hair was silvery blonde, and she stood tall and proud. Her figure was perfect, as it was possible to be. Many of the Hogwarts males sighed lustfully. Harry looked around at his friends. His question was about what was going on the tip of his tongue. When he stopped, both Ron and Neville seemed to be affected as well. He turned to Ginny. "Gin, what's wrong with Ron and Neville?" Ginny looked at him surprised. "That girl is probably a Veela, Harry. They're classified as magical creatures, and they have a lure that draws males in." Harry looked confused. Why wasn't he affected then? Hermione looked at him, sidelong. "From what the books say, only the men who can resist them are those who are already in love." Harry looked at his friend, then over at Ginny. The two of them blushed and looked down. Durmstrang arrived a few minutes later, their ship rising out of the Black Lake like the Flying Dutchman myth, while everyone was still collecting themselves. The only real thing of note was that the Quidditch star, Victor Crumb, was in the group. Ron wondered aloud if he'd be able to get an autograph, while the rest of them rolled their eyes. That boy was way too Quidditch obsessed sometimes. Once they were all inside, Dumbledore made his official welcome, before they all tucked into the feast with relish. After they were finished, the headmaster stood up again. "Once more, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our fellow witches and wizards from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. Should you have need of anything during your stay, please do not hesitate to ask." He then moved to stand beside a large case that had been placed in the hallway before the meal. "As you all know the rules, I will not review them again, but I must warn you to think through your decision with care. Should you choose to enter your name, you are agreeing to commit to the tournament for its duration. It is a binding magical contract that cannot be undone. Names will be chosen by a magical artifact. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Goblet of Fire." He tapped his wand to the crate, and it melted away like chocolate to reveal a rather impressive goblet sprouting blue flames out of the top. "You have until supper tomorrow to enter your name." With that, he dismissed the students to their beds. The Tri-Wizard tournament had begun. Ginny pulled Harry along with her as they made their way down the hall. He tried to protest, but she was relentless. She stopped him outside of Minerva's office, and he swallowed. "Gin?" He tried, but she shook her head. "You told me you'd talk to her, Harry, and you haven't. She needs to know what you saw. I feel like it could be important." With that, she knocked on the door and entered the room, dragging Harry along behind her, and wasted no time telling the Transfiguration Professor what Harry had dreamed. Minerva was quiet for a minute, before she asked her charge a few clarifying details. He tried to answer as best he could, but it was challenging. "I'm not really sure how to describe the fuzziness," he admitted. "It's almost like looking through a foggy window or something. Like it was supposed to be clear, but for some reason it wasn't. I could make out a few details, and I'm certain of what we've told you. I just wish I could tell you more." Minerva nodded. "Do you have any thoughts?" she asked. Harry bit his lip, looking down. "I think they were talking about getting me to compete in the tournament," he confessed, drawing gasps from both women. He explained. "They were talking about a contest, and I know my name was mentioned. Something about making sure I was chosen. And given who was involved and my luck, the rest isn't hard to figure out." McGonagall nodded shakily. She was about to say something when Harry looked up, his expression pleading. "You know I would never try to enter my name, right? I don't want the fame. I certainly don't need the prize money. It's just not worth it." Harry was calmed down by Ginny, pressing herself to his side. "We know you wouldn't, Harry," she reassured him. Minerva nodded again, this time more surely. I would never accuse you of such a thing, Harry. I like to think I know you better than that. Harry seemed relieved that they knew he wouldn't do such a thing. Minerva walked him back to Gryffindor Tower, giving her young charge a hug before bidding them good night. Speculation on who would be the champions was all anyone would talk about the next day. While they didn't know the visiting students well enough, most of them thought Krum was the favourite from Durmstrang. The Weasley twins had a pool going on who would be Hogwarts champion. Most houses were cheering for their own to get chosen. Harry personally thought Cedric, who had just turned 17 the previous month, would be a likely choice. He would be happy to see Angelina get chosen, as her 17th birthday had taken place barely a week earlier, but he really felt that Hufflepuff deserved its chance to shine. Love that. Fellow Hufflepuffs, comment down below. Halloween passed by quickly with the excitement, and soon enough everyone was enjoying the rather fantastic feast, complete with gigantic pumpkins and live bats. Harry had to applaud Hagrid for the pumpkins, and Flitwick for his impressive charmed carvings, though he thought the professor may have gone a little too far. After a first year ran away screaming as a troll carving raised its club over its head as if to smash her. It was amusing, perhaps, to everyone but the first year girl in question. As the food disappeared, Dumbledore stood up and made his way to stand next to the goblet. The flames slowly began to turn purple with a reddish tinge over the last few hours. Now that you are all fortified with food and drink, it is time for the champions to be chosen. It appears the goblet is almost ready to make its decision. Barely a minute later, the flames turned bright red and a piece of parchment shot out. Dumbledore plucked it out of the air. The champion for Beauxbatons is Fleur Delacour. The silver-haired witch Ginny had identified as being at least part Vela stood up, flinging her hair over her shoulder, and headed to the front of the hall, where she was directed to a small door behind the head table. Once more, most of the males in the room stared after her. More than one was drooling. The flames turned red again, and Dumbledore read the next name. The champion for Durmstrang is Victor Krum. The Quidditch star stood up to massive applause and stoically followed Fleur. Dumbledore caught the third piece of parchment. The champion for Hogwarts is Cedric Diggory. If someone had been standing outside the Great Hall, they may have thought a bomb had just gone off. The explosion of sound was so loud, everyone was cheering for the likeable Hufflepuff, joined his fellow champions. Slytherin was less enthusiastic, but Blaise, Daphne and the members of the DA were cheering for their friend. It had expanded quite a bit over the last few weeks, and now included many third and fourth years as well. They had to restructure the groups and were now focused on more separating students by which subject they needed help with, though Harry's stipulation was that the different houses worked together had not changed. It caused some tension, but his fellow classmates were slowly getting used to it. It was slow going, but even the Slytherin students were becoming integrated into the group. In Slytherin, about half the third years were coming regularly, and in fourth year Millicent Bulstrode, Tracy Davis had joined in, and Theodore Nott seemed to be on his way, if the rather confusing conversation he had had with Blaise the week before was any indication. Hufflepuff was of course ecstatic that their house would be represented, and Ravenclaw was supporting the significant other of one of their own. Gryffindor was just happy that the champion hadn't come from Slytherin, of course. All of the DA members were cheering loudly as the Hufflepuff. Cedric was well liked amongst his peers. Dumbledore waited until the noise died down, before he smiled. Yes, yes, well met to all the champions. Now that they have been chosen, we will... But he stopped, as the flames turned red once more, and a fourth piece of parchment was spat out. He unfolded it, and somehow knowing what would be written there, and called out, Harry Potter. End of chapter 18. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Starting to get good now. Meeting Fleur, Krum and Cedric being awesome. The DA is really shaping up. Remember to like, comment and subscribe, and click that little bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. See you in the next chapter.